This is Wu Ludlaw, General of the Armies. This is an oration of a fictional story I'm working on. I'm trying to make an official screenplay, and this is the first reading of it as well. It's called Evolution Forced for Survival. At the end of the second pandemic on Earth, there came a time when restitution had to be made, as law had to be upheld in all cases to prove such a thing existed, as there was a progression to military justice with a third world war. As this so happened, the Holy Land found itself in war. People didn't want to call war while under a level of attack that can never be anything except war. It was roughly World War Jew, not just a Jew war, but World War Jew to start World War III. World War Jew was a springboard for all laws to be called down based around a sedition case, with every legal system that was a conspiracy of sedition taking place everywhere in existence, specifically with a species. World War Jew, the rough term of the attacks that occurred that were war in the Holy Land, enabled the God King, who had resurfaced, an immortal being from outer space, a star system of star systems, the highest rank of all militaries, the one who created every system, the predecessor of the species ever considered human, of which were made in his image, the 6-star general who won all the world wars, General Law, General God, Holy Roman Emperor Pope I, the highest ranking Stalin in the way Stalins are the popes of what they are, was able to give orders while also chopping down his systems filled with people there to make them not function, so that the hell unleashed on Earth in the Holy Land was used as a basis to genetically sequence, basically by DNA, the problem species as if they were Mendelian plants of a science experiment, with the penalties to be meted by the military justice and law that have no concern over what it is they have to control, except justice must be done perfectly. Invoked all genetic coding, encoding, and decoding to have to take place, starting with the collection of the DNA of the maximum offenders of World War II to figure out exactly who and what they were and what was causing such expressions of problems in existence in this type of system of understanding of expressions of such. The 6-star general, the one and only ever who had won the world wars, was under a constant assault of constant combat of a war of all wars, of every enemy in existence, of everything there can possibly be an enemy of, all at the same time, at all times, everywhere, with an empirical absolute of every time the check for this problem occurs, it is there in this way. The problem seemed to be a species pretending to be something it's not, controlling many species, maybe this master species that takes many forms, not just those that appear to be the standard ones of what wages war, who during the pandemic basically lost it all while being proven wrong in every way and having been either genetically disabled or predisposed and having had it triggered by their will to do so to themselves by choosing vaccine by mutation and death instead of the cures and inoculations the 6-star general had prepared. They attacked the general and his work in such a way he had to give up on them and decide to get rid of these expressions of suffering. The enemies had identified as pure suffering. It took the God General some time to figure out the actual terms of proof. with the complete understanding they were, but not the words to put it in. It turns out this species, these people, these enemies, were the pure suffering that any type of having to sense them is, as it is an act of torture by sensing them, always to be, always having been, and the sense of them always being a torture of a suffering taking place, not just past suffering, but any sense of them is an ongoing type of torture as an ongoing cause of suffering, making them the pure suffering that is the torture that is their existence. The general, the God general, the owner of the planet, who had to resurface after having to go under a deep cover to figure everything out and learn the languages of the species, it turns out, does not actually really properly speak language and never communicates anything except violent threats, as if a stone falling downhill does while moving at you, was able to use the massive war attacks of World War II in the Holy Land to log into the defense grid he had built as the creator and designer of all industry, all heavy industry, all weapons, war itself, all defense grids, every part of everything military, as well as its basic creator and the worker who made these things in the physical reality. In order to train it, because he was the only one who had the training and had spoken widely and tried to teach all about what he had to go through in the way that had prepared him for this. So he was able to do this when it was the duty, as well as the nature of everyone in these events, to allow him and enable him to get to the places, to finally get out of the simulations and simulated ways he had prepared for this and actually begin the sequences so things could go right. The enemies demanded, in the way they barely communicated, that the mechanism of control of their behavior that was so wildly out of control, it was just like a physical attack of mass falling like an avalanche, that they just be killed to control them at every meet of every chance you can ever have to have them express what it takes to stop their evil ill will of attack of what is everything that they express and them as an expression. And kill means to completely destroy them in the way they have no physical function whatsoever and can basically no longer even be in physical reality as mass. The God General pushed them to attack the defense grid so the defense grid would handle it for them and they could just commit a type of societal suicide of a species instead of having to be smited or taken out by a different life form. The general, having been the designer of the system to finish them, had to admit he would be what would finish them, as he had agreed to finish them all, because their calls for their deaths of kill us to control us were kill us all whenever you would agree to kill them, one or many. In the way they all had to be completely destroyed and removed from existence as a type of a collective will of an expression that is pure suffering, such that each individual was a part of the collective, and the only way to stop them is to destroy them all in this type of collective. The general wasn't for sure of his systems and how they would work, maybe having never figured it out, just having enabled them. But these enemies kept pushing, while the general had nearly everything taken from him, as he made basically all the wealth in existence, nearly, and was the continuing source of all the wealth, of course, of the nation he was trapped in, the horrific land of freedom lying, of a false state of United States, of a babble about how it's a land of enslavement and lies that has been stolen by an America or something sort of like that. The general was down to basically having to collect refuse and be a refuse worker to be able to have the resources he needed to survive without having to get violent with the problem species. The problem species was so ill-willed and suicidal and genetically disordered and disabled, it was enraged in a way it shouldn't have been, wanting to destroy everything in refuse collection, which does turn out to be basically everything in existence of mass they know of. Just so people who needed it, that were able to get it just for putting the work in to get to the refuse collector and collect it themselves, could be stopped for the plan of these enemies to end existence themselves last by mechanisms like these, starting with the maximum torture for as long as possible of all higher forms of life they could, not them. The system told that the refuse collection system that was a defense against people having to get violent for the need of what could be recollected from it was the final straw and the last line in the stand that had to be crossed by these enemies to get what they wanted, their removal from existence. The general was the god of all the courts, the judge of all. The general had brought all the restitution cases based on industry not being allowed if not run by he alone. And as it turns out, the recompense that was also the restitution was the defense grid's refuse recollection and recycling system having to destroy matter in a way where money and wealth in a restitution case can just be the pay of the destruction of wealth to take away what keeps making the need for further restitution in a way that is recompense. And the god general was able to set in motion a sequence of events so that the defense grid at the point of refuse collection could be controlled such that the elements, the basic atoms of existence that were the ones that needed to be destroyed in the restitution case could be, by this system, at least at those points, if not everywhere, with our great God, Judge, General trying to make it peaceful so that as long as the enemy's physical forms, such as their bodies, were not made of what was being destroyed as in its individual expressions, it could be so that they never could be made of it again. This was a slow process so that everybody ready to evolve to be made of other stuff had every chance to evolve, to survive, letting evolution be forced for survival as proof you were not the enemy. And finally, the enemy that wouldn't stop attacking, that was taught to self-attack or attack all in this way, wasn't able to, with the god general starting the sequence of events with the basics of what should stop these enemies as they presented themselves. Although all the DNA and genetic work proved they were not human, they were expected to be carbon life forms, and all carbon was destroyed. This was about enough to handle this sequence of events, as the defense grid had to destroy everything that had ever expressed this type of suffering in this manner, at which point no mass ever existed again that could ever cause these types of suffering, specifically torture. The end. Have a great rest of your times.